Look, very briefly, the answer is just over 10 days ago, we staged an emissions reduction auction. We acquired the largest reduction in emissions in Australian history, 47 million tonnes, and this is reducing emissions through lowest cost projects around the country. More than 30 million tonnes of that was through on-farm work, through forestry projects, reforestation, through avoided deforestation, great environmental outcomes, but also real reductions in emissions in a way that we've never seen before on such a scale in Australia. So that presumption to your question is one which doesn't apply. It's not about belief or disbelief. It's only now. That boat has long sailed. We're right in the space of only now being focused on what will deliver the greatest results at the fastest possible pace, which is what I'm focused on. And for me, this has been the work of my life, and I'm absolutely delighted that there's been such a huge uptake or delivering huge reductions in emissions.
Mark Butler.
I'm tempted to go down that path about the auction a couple of weeks ago, but I'm not going to. I'm going to try and answer this question. And if I get time, I'd like to respond to the auction. But there are no climate change deniers in my party, or not that I've come across at least. The challenge for us is how we translate a couple of very fundamental beliefs into practical legislation in the Parliament. And Australia, unfortunately, has a level of division around the basic tenets of what is needed to deal with climate change that many other countries just don't have. If you look at the UK general election, they very happily aren't having the level of debate we still have here. What we need is a substantial agreement around the need for Australia to do its fair share to ensure that global warming does not exceed 2 degrees Celsius. Now, that is the most fundamental tenet of climate change policy, and yet still we don't have that in Australia. The Energy Policy White Paper that the government released only a few weeks ago is predicated on a 4-degree warming scenario. It looks at the economic gains that will be able to be achieved by Australia through a 4-degree scenario. So we need to get back to at least agreeing about the most basic tenets. 2 degrees must be the limit of global warming above pre-industrial levels. Australia must do its fair share. We, per capita, are the heaviest polluters in the OECD, so we need to do some heavy lifting there, in line with what is being proposed in America and many European countries as well. And we need to have independent advice, not tossed around just in the Parliament, but independent expert advice from bodies like the Climate Change Authority about what those reduction targets should be over the course of the period that you're talking about.
Very quick response to this one, if you can. If Greg Hunt's direct action policies are seen to work in the period that they're in government, would you adopt them yourself?
They won't work. They won't work.
They just did.
This auction, as an example, one of the contracts that Greg entered into was to AGL, the biggest polluter in the country, to underwrite some payments for landfill gas projects that have already been operating, in some cases, for more than 10 years. So Greg is going to hand over millions of taxpayers' dollars to the biggest polluter in the country to continue the landfill gas operations that they've been operating, in some cases, for more than 10 years. So there will be some reduction in carbon pollution, but it was going to happen anyway. No. It was going to happen anyway.
All right, OK.
At the same time,
he's got to be able to respond to that specific point.
No, there's another important point. At the same time, AGL is able to continue increasing its carbon pollution from the coal-fired generators it operates in the other part of its business. I mean, this is a hopeless policy and an absolutely irresponsible use of taxpayers' dollars. OK, well, you obviously get a right of reply.
Thank you. Look, very briefly, two things here. Firstly, you talk about an independent regulator. The Clean Energy Regulator ran what has been seen by everybody as a flawless process where their test was genuine emissions reduction. And they've run a process compared with, dare I mention what we saw with the home insulation program or green loans or Citizens Assembly or cash for clunkers, where there was no criticism of the process, where there was an outstanding outcome. And what we're seeing is in small communities right across Australia, there will be farms that benefit, there will be local biodiversity benefits, and most significantly and importantly, a massive amount of emissions reduction on a scale never seen before in Australia at a fraction of the cost of what occurred under the carbon tax, without that being thrown on to the general public through higher electricity and gas prices.
Okay, do you want to
It's
just
a tremendous
quickly address the AGL issue, because Mark Butler more or less said this direct action program with AGL, the gas company, is essentially paying a polluter to do what they were doing anyway.
No, I know you've sometimes used the same language as the ALP about paying polluters. This is completely false. What we are doing, and this is the really interesting thing...
I'm just telling you what he said so you can respond to it. Don't sort of put me in there.
You and I have had these debates for many years, Tony.
I tell you, the person who said that most clearly was Malcolm Turnbull.
It's always the case that somehow it's the other...
Malcolm Turnbull, I think, is in your party.
It's the other take. But let me say this. Everything that's happening is genuine abatement, real emissions reduction. And I would note that they ran a program called the Clean Tech Investment Program, which gave out, I think it was about $1 billion. The Auditor General found that there was no effective allocation mechanism, no guarantee of value for money, and 58% of the projects were not justified, whereas we've had 100% tick-off from an independent probity advisor. That means that the public gets value for money, but most importantly, we get massive emissions reductions in Australia on a scale never seen before.